I was born and raised in a small parish in South Louisiana. I grew up on the bayous fishing and hunting with my dad and my uncle. I knew the swamps like a map. My dad always taught me to read the many passages and canals. But this one day we decided we would go alligator hunting on a bayou further out than where we usually go. This wasn't something new. We would usually go to these honey holes once every few months. We got up early and started to get everything ready so we could head to the place where we usually launch our boat. It was my job to make sure we had enough fuel for the trip. We would easily be out there all day, and would need a few cans of fuel to make sure we would be able to get back okay. I remember I went up to the boat to make sure the cans had gas in them, but just as I got to our boat, our neighbour came out. She told us to be careful as there was 2 boats missing in the bayous. We knew how easily you could get lost out there. If you lose concentration for even a minute, you can go missing. Just as I was explaining how much I hoped they'd get found, my dad called my name and told me to come help him with the guns. I said bye to the neighbour and headed over to my dad to help him load up the rifles and the bait. We had 4 rifles and a bucket of chicken bits. We loaded the gear onto the boat, hooked it up to the truck, and set off. It took around 15 minutes to get where we usually launch the boat. We arrived at the bayou around dawn. It was so peaceful. All you could hear was the light buzz of insects in the distance. We launched the boat in the water and set off to get our first hooks in place. It took around an hour to get to our first spot. We found a few good trees to set our hooks and moved on to the next spot. It's amazing how time flies when you're busy. The whole day flew past in a split second, it seemed. We decided we would go set our last hooks in our honey hole spot. We finished baiting up the area and moved the boat over to a hidden bank that was thick with tree stumps and weeds. My dad and uncle liked to watch the water to see what the gators were doing and where they would go, so the next time they'd know where the gators liked to sit. We sat there and watched till the sun set. We thought it would be best to head back to the truck. It's never good to get stuck out in the swamps after dark. You can easily lose your direction and think you're seeing things that aren't really there. The darkness plays tricks with your eyes and ears. My uncle started the outboard motor, and we started heading back in the direction of the truck. We only managed to get about a mile down the bayou when the outboard started chugging. It was out of gas. I just remembered I didn't check the cans to see if we had spare fuel. My dad picked up a can and instantly noticed it was empty. I just knew he was going to get mad. He shook the can and then dropped it on the floor. He then picked up the other can. Before I could say anything, my dad threw the can at the floor of the boat and started yelling at me. I tried to argue back, but it was my fault. I forgot to do the one job I had. I had to sit there and take it. My uncle tried calming him down and telling him we need to find a way back. My dad sat back down and tried to sort out a plan with my uncle. They were going through ways of getting us back. They mentioned us getting to the bank and walking back. But with how the bayous are, it would be impossible for us to get through all the trees, water, weeds, not to mention the alligators, snakes, and other things out here that can kill you. The other thing mentioned was if we could use anything in the boat as oars to try and row back. A little time went by, and whilst they were talking about ways we could get back, I was keeping an eye on the water to see if any gators were coming up to the boat. I was using my flashlight to try and find their eyes. Alligators have reflective eyes, and are easy to see in the dark if you've got a light. I noticed a few small gators around, but they weren't close enough to be a threat. I then remembered there was a flare gun under the driver's stool. I quickly grabbed the bag, opened the zip, and pulled out the flare gun. I showed my dad and uncle and told them there was only one flare left in the bag. They quickly started arguing about when we should send the flare up, now or later. I thought we should do it now whilst we can, before it gets too late into the night. No one might see it. I decided to shoot the flare up, which caused my uncle and my dad to go silent, and forced everyone to look up into the night sky. All you could hear was the sound of the bayou and a burning trail coming off the flare. The whole area lit up. We were all looking up at the flare when we heard a loud snap, like a big branch got snapped off of a tree. In sync, we all looked over to where the noise came from. and without a word, we started searching with our flashlights. I scanned the bank behind us and saw a large branch hanging over into the water. I could feel my heart start to beat faster. When things like this happen here, it's easy for you to start losing your sense of what's real and what's not real. You always hear ghost stories around here. You got to try your best to keep telling yourself you're okay and that nothing's going to happen to you. We didn't see anything and just thought the branch rotted off the tree. We thought we would stay put for a while longer, in hopes that someone saw the flare and would come to rescue us. Minutes felt like hours, and all us three would talk about is ghost stories. I knew they were just stories and myths, but being out here, vulnerable, at the mercy of the swamp, it just took over my mind. It was so tough to try and not panic. You could tell my dad and uncle were also struggling not to let their mind run away with them. Everyone around here believes the stories, and even my dad and uncle. The more time went by, the more skittish we would all get when there would be a noise. Every so often you'd hear an alligator slip into the water, or a rustle from the vegetation. The frogs would dull out the silence in between. Out of nowhere, we heard a grunt come from behind the boat near the fallen tree branch. It was so different to any other animal we'd ever heard. Both my uncle and my dad picked up a rifle and aimed it in the direction of the noise. I'd never heard anything like it before. Just then it happened again, that same grunt noise, but this time it was to the left of the boat, on the other bank. My uncle spun round, aiming the gun over to the noise. My dad was still watching the back. A low growl began to emit from the area where the first noise came from. My dad fired a shot into the darkness. Silence. He then fired again. This time a painful screech came from the direction my dad was firing in. He must have hit whatever it was making the noise. We heard this thing moving fast through the trees. There's nothing I know of around here that can move that fast with this dense swamp. I was terrified. What the hell was that thing? My dad said we were not staying here any longer. He and my uncle started using anything they could find to use as a paddle. It was working. We were moving. Not fast, but we were moving. Any distance away from that thing was worth it. I kept my eyes pinned to the area we just came from, just watching and listening. We came to a narrowing of the water. We'd only be a few feet from the bank as we were going through. This was the quickest way back, so we had to go for it. I picked up a rifle and took the safety off. I would be our only defence against whatever this thing was, whilst we were moving through. And of course, as we entered the narrowing, something came charging at us from the darkness. I fired. Still this thing was coming at us. I fired another 3 times, and the bayou fell silent. All you could hear was the creak of the frogs. We wasted no time getting to the end of this narrow channel and back into the wider stretch of the bayou. We got about 20 feet into the wider stretch and we heard an outboard in the distance. It was coming our way. A light appeared from round the corner, shining right at us. We shielded our eyes. The boat started to slow down. And a voice asking us if we were okay. It was the most comforting feeling I've ever had. We could finally get home and out of this nightmare. It turned out that a resident at a nearby camp saw our flare and called the sheriff. They towed us back to our truck. We sat down on the grass in disbelief of what had just happened. I really don't know what that was. There's tales of shapeshifters and all kinds of monsters out here. It could have been anything.